Howdy folks, today we're going to talk about CRUD routes. CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete, and it's a very common way of building APIs to access models that you've created on the back end. Let's get started. So I've got a pretty standard MVC flow here. Take a look at the models. We have our widget model. It just has a name and a quantity. 2 fields, that's it. The quantity can be null, the name cannot. I put that up in here. We have our Sequelize config, pretty normal. We have our schema, again pretty normal. We have our seed data, which the seed data basically comes in here and it imports the widget, goes in here and builds 10 random widgets with random names and random quantities and pushes those into the database, just so I can have a variety. So now if we look at our controllers, okay, we're using modular routing. So we've got our API router hooked up here. And we've got inside that our widget router. And inside that we have just a blank router that we're not doing anything with. This is how you want to set up your routes generally, because let's say I'm on a team and I'm working on the widget routes. I'm not going to conflict with anyone because I'm only working this one specific file. If all your routes are in one file, you start conflicting with people and it starts causing problems and you get merge conflicts. You could still get merge conflicts working this way, but it's another way of helping avoid that. So for CRUD, we have create, read, update, and delete. What that translates to is create is a post route, read are get routes, update are put or patch routes, and delete is the delete route. So let's start with the create route, since that's the most basic one. Well, first of all, actually I need to import my model. Widget and that's going to be up 2 directories and then in models, and I just import the model index because that will import all of my models. So in order to do a post route, router.post, I'm just going to give it the slash. Why am I giving it the slash? Well, if I look at my controller index, I'm already going API widget. So that means if I have a slash here, this is going to be post API widget, which is totally fine. This is a good example of a RESTful API because it tells me exactly what object I'm dealing with, the widget, and it tells me that I'm post. You could say create here, but you don't need to because that's what the post does. You can already assume just by looking at the post that you're creating. Okay, so I'm going to create my callback function here. Important, you want to put a try catch. And when you get your error, you don't want to swallow your error. And what I mean by that is if I said res status 500, whoops, not status code 500 dot text or send not text e dot message, that's going to send the error message up to the client. Generally, you don't want to do that because your error messages are what we consider internal data. All right, they can give information on your inner workings to people outside of your system, and that can make it easier for people to hack. So often, if we do a 500, we just don't send anything. It just lets the system know something went wrong. But let's say something does go wrong, and our client comes to us and they say, "Hey, I wanted to do this route and it just told me it was a 500 error. Can you figure out what's wrong?" No, I cannot. Because at this point I have no idea what the error is. What I want to do is I also want to console log the error. If you console log the error at this point, you're logging it to your own backend so that your logging systems can pick it up, which means you can know what the message is and your clients don't. They just see there's an error. So if you don't have this, that's what we call swallowing the error. It means that error never shows up in your logs, which is a bad thing. You want to have that at least at the top level. So we want to create a new object. In RESTful, oftentimes you return the new object that gets created. So I'm going to say new object equals, not new, widget dot create. Okay, and there's a couple ways to go about this. I could just spread, I called these both res. I could spread the request body. That's totally a thing I could do. That's completely legitimate. The one issue you run into with that is I can put anything in the request body. Now, a lot of times there are systems that you can put on top of your APIs that let you validate and make sure that bad data isn't coming in. And if you have one of those, totally fine to do the request body. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spread the body to just pull out these two fields. And these are the two fields that I can put in my widget. The reason why is if I give a body that's got bad data in it, well, then this widget create's going to fail, and it's going to fail with a very bad error message. Instead, I can just ignore any extra fields by spreading the body like this, and then passing them in like so. Once that's done, that's all, we're done. We're good. The widget create Sequelize will have created a new ID for us, so we don't need to worry about that. Then I just need to let the browser know this is 200, this was good, it was created, and then I'm just going to send the new object as JSON. So with that done, we now have a way to create. Let's move on to get. I'm actually going to close this for now. There are two read operations we need. The first one is just going to be get API widget. What that's going to do, despite the fact that it's singular here, that's going to get all the widgets because I'm not giving it an ID, and this is a common standard in REST, that if you don't put a specific ID like this, it just gets you everything in the database. Usually there's a limit, like it gets you 50 or 100 at a time, and as you deal with larger databases, you'll want to add in pagination. But for now, that'll work. And then we have get API widget ID. This is the read or the get that gets a single object, which is useful in a lot of cases if you have that ID already and you just want to get the data for a single one. So even though read is a single operation read, you generally have two APIs connected to it. Again, because this is singular widget, but it does return multiple widgets. If that's confusing, you can totally change it to be plural. No worries. It's just I'm used to doing it singular because for post, you're acting on a single object. For get with the ID, you're acting on a single object. Put and patch are on single objects, and delete is on single objects. So really the multi-read is the only time where you're doing multiple objects. So that's why we tend to use singular. You could make this one specifically plural. Nothing's stopping you from that. Just the issue is everything else is singular, which is set here, so that's kind of difficult to do. And it's a little bit outside of the REST conventions because we understand by looking at this that widget is the object name, and if you have widgets, that can throw off people in systems because they're not expecting it. So let's look at the first one. Router.get, again the slash because API and widget are already defined other places. Okay, I'm actually just going to steal this because the try catch is basically going to be the same thing. And this is almost going to be the same thing too. We're not having a body. Instead, we're going to say widgets. Well, I'll just rewrite the code just so it's less confusing. Widgets equals await widget.findAll with an empty clause here. You don't have to put the empty object. I just do it by force of habit. We're not putting a where clause in here. We're not putting a where clause because we want to get all the widgets. We want to return everything. Again, if you were doing pagination, you'd have some limits, you'd have some offsets at that point, but we're not doing any of that right now. And then we just have res.status 200.json widgets. That's it. All we're doing, we're fetching all the widgets and we're returning them. Pretty simple. Now I'm actually just going to copy this whole block because the one for the ID is similar. So this we're going to have the : ID. Again, the API and the widget are already done in previous files. We just need our :ID here. The try catch, pretty much the same thing. Again, we don't want to swallow that error. We want to log it if there is an error and send a 500. In a lot of cases, you want to send a 400 instead if the users put bad data, but that's more advanced error handling, which we haven't gotten to yet. So in this case, we're going to say widget equals await widget dot find by pk, pk standing for the primary key, right? You can do this with a where clause also. So if you want to say find one and then where ID equals your ID, but find by pk is just a little bit more efficient about it. In this case, I'm going to say request dot query dot ID. Query meaning a query param, which is this ID here. Because I called it ID here, I have to call it ID here. If I called it widget ID in this case, I'd have to call it widget ID here. Now, this could return an object or null, and we want to handle that. So I could say if not widget, then we're going to say res.status 404.end. Didn't exist. We don't want to give the user null in that case because we want to make it clear to them that, hey, this didn't exist. You sent me a bad ID. Sometimes that's okay, and that's why 404 is not considered a critical error state. It does mean that what you wanted to do didn't happen, but it also can mean that what you wanted just didn't exist, and so you need to show an appropriate error message, which can be perfectly normal. If the widget does exist, we're going to do the same thing, status 200.send, not send, JSON widget, just like that. All right. And so actually, I realized, because I just tested it, that it's supposed to be request.params to get the query parameters, not query. Request.query actually gets the URL query. I personally always get confused with those two things, but if you want to get something that's in the URL here, it does need to be the params. All right, so let's take a look at update. There's two kinds of update, and normally we only look at put, but I want to just touch on patch briefly because there is a difference. Put is the update where it updates the entire object. So let's say that I went to run put API widget 10, for instance, and I gave it a name but didn't give it a quantity. What would you expect in that case? Would you expect that it only updates the name? That is what a patch does. The patch will only update the fields that you gave it in the body. The put updates the entire object, and if you didn't provide fields, they get set to null. So that's an important distinction. If you're doing a put, you have to provide the entire object, all the fields, even if you're not changing them, because otherwise they get set to null. Whereas a patch will only update the fields that you want to have updated. Patch is a little bit more complicated than a put, so we don't normally build them, but they can be really useful if you need just that single field functionality. So let's do this. Again, we're also putting an ID. Why are we putting an ID? Because we need to be able to figure out exactly which widget we're dealing with. Very similar to here. Now, there's a couple ways you can go about a put. I'm just going to copy this code right here. I can go straight into the Sequelize update, and then I can actually look at the response to determine if it was able to update anything at all. If you're not able to do that, or that conceptually doesn't make sense, you can call find by pk to get the widget ID, and then have this status 404 end. If you don't find it, then if you do find it, you can call widget.update. And at this point, we're actually going to have to put a wait on that. I actually want to borrow from what I did in the body here because it's going to be the same idea. You don't want put and patch both take bodies like post. You don't want the fields that are bad to show up in here because otherwise Sequelize will crash if you do that. So then I want to say name quantity. Once that's done, I could say, okay, res.status 200.json widget, just like we did before. Again, I'm not going to go over the patch this time. I'm just going to go over the put. The patch is similar. So now we have the delete. Delete is for when you want to full delete the object. Now here's where things get a little interesting. Oftentimes, you're not actually going to delete an object from your database. You instead will have an isDeleted field that lets you know if the object is deleted or not and should be returned. That's because it can be helpful for a variety of reasons to keep objects around even if they've been deleted. This is one of the reasons for the GDPR, where they've said people have the right to actually have their data deleted. It was because companies like Facebook and Google, they would not delete your data. They just mark it as user has requested a deletion so that they didn't show it to you or anyone else, but they still held on to it, which is a little dangerous in a lot of ways. That technically is a put route, right? If you actually want to do that deletion, because that delete is going to update a field. However, usually we'll do that as a delete route anyway, just because we want to show people that it's been deleted, and it's kind of counterintuitive to call a put or a patch if you're actually deleting an object. Even if it's what we call soft deleting, where we just set the field to true and make it appear as if it's deleted. So basically the short term of that is, even if you're not actually using Sequelize destroy to delete the object and you're just changing a flag to make it look like it's deleted, you still usually make a delete route because that's technically the action you're doing. So route.delete. Again, we have to have an ID because we need to know what we're deleting, right? As response. Similar thing here. I'm actually going to copy this same thing. Find my widget. If I don't find it here, and then I'm actually going to call destroy on it. There is, you can actually call Sequelize like await widget.destroy and then put in the ID. This is just a little nicer because in that case you're making the query to the database and then you have to parse what is kind of a confusing response to determine if it actually deleted anything. In this case, we get an object, and so we know we can just call destroy on it and it gets destroyed. Then it is common, well, it's not uncommon to just return the object that you deleted in the delete request, just so that you can clarify that, hey, this is what I deleted. You don't have to. You could just return empty, but it's kind of nice to have. And I realized after testing I did make a typo. I put ID here, but this is widget ID. So make sure again that those match. I'd use widget ID everywhere else, but here I'd use typo. And actually let me delete API widget 10, for instance. Okay, so in summary, post is for creation, which is the C part of CRUD. Read, which is the R part, you'll have two get APIs generally. A get without the ID, which will get all the elements, and a get with the ID, which will get a single element and return a 404 if it can't find it. Note the get all elements will usually never return a 404, even if there's no widgets, because having no items is a valid response and you weren't looking for a specific one. So you still return 200 in that case. For update, which is the U of CRUD, we have put and patch, where put will update every field of the object, patch will update only the fields you gave. That also takes in an ID and uses a body similar to the post. Delete will actually just straight up delete the object. Either we'd use Sequelize destroy like here, or you'd update it to change a specific flag to be deleted true. It also takes an ID because you need to know what widget to delete, but it does not take a body because it doesn't really need a body. So, this has been CRUD APIs. I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you all next time.